Hi, and welcome to the Custom Saber Shop channel on YouTube. Since Rob happens to be out fighting a phalanx of snowmen, this is FJK, and I'm back to do my first tutorial video in quite some time. Tonight's subject is going to be, as you can maybe tell by the shirt and by the mat, we're going to be discussing wiring a Crystal Focus 10. Now, before we get into actually wiring the saber, a lot of newer people to the hobby are always looking, or always on the lookout for videos about how to do installs, how to wire up a Crystal Focus, what tools do I need, and all that. So this is going to be a multi-stage video. The first stage, I'm going to go over basic tools that sabersmiths use. The second part will be actually wiring the Crystal Focus up, and I'll show you the basics of soldering and what connections to make, etc., etc. So the first part of this is really what tools do I need to do an install. Regardless if it's a Crystal Focus, a Plector Labs product, a Profi, or any of the other sound cards out there, they're a basic every sabersmith needs. In my little surgical tray, and this is only a fraction of my tools, we have a lot of the basics, which are just really handheld items. I have a little set of miniature pliers, a pair of pliers with a bent tip, really long tips, little clippers, or I call them snips, and I also have one that's flat, and I usually use this when I join wires together, when I twist them together. Wire cutters, wire strippers, very handy, and they're essential. I also have a bunch of tweezers. Now, I have several different types, and there are differences, and they do have specific functions. Okay. These are what I call locking tweezers. Basically, we push them open, they clamp onto parts. Very handy for when you need to hold out a specific wire into place, or you need to grab a wire to desolder it. There's both a curved and straight version. These, and there's more of these, I just usually use just these two. These are my anti-magnetic super fine tweezers. I usually use these when I do tiny chip work like SMD jumpers, SMD LEDs. These are the things you need. I also have hemostats. I have a curved one, I have a straight one. Again, good for grabbing wires. You can lock it into place and pull, or thread, or whatever. I just have some general pliers, which, used for various things. Let's see what else is here. A little 3-pound grabber. I don't really use this that much anymore, but it's there. I have some long picks. I usually use these to take stuff apart sometimes, or when I need to probe around inside of a saber. Little tiny screwdrivers. I usually use these whenever I make something and I use micro connectors. When you have to make your own ends, you have a male end and a female end. Well, these little flathead screwdrivers are great for the female end. A couple of files, and again, I have a whole set of these, but there's only really a couple I use on a consistent basis. This one is kind of oval shaped, and I have one that's rectangular shaped. And I have a couple little brushes. I have an old toothbrush, a regular little paintbrush, a slightly bigger brush, some thermal paste if I do LEDs, Arctic Silver. I have a little pad of 3M strips if I need to. These are good sometimes to secure your sound card to a chassis, like a 3D chassis with little clips have broken off or something like that. These could be useful for that. They have a few other uses, but those are the main ones. I have some synthetic grease, because if you ever deal with MHS parts, make sure the threads are clean and make sure you grease them. Okay, so that's basically what's in the toy box. For tonight, I'm not going to need the majority of this because I did a lot of preparation work for this video ahead of time, which means that all the wires I plan to use are already cut and tinned. The little accessory boards like a Bluetooth module and a little OLED screen have already been wired up. So really I'm not going to need a whole lot of these tools because basically we're just going to be talking about soldering, and I'm going to show you how to actually do it. Now, aside from what's in the surgical tray, a few other things which every good sabersmith should have, and I'm sure Rob in his videos have discussed these. A pair of helping hands. I use this for my board work. It's a little mini vise. Mine's a little taller than Rob's. What can I tell you? A soldering station. Now mine is very old, but it works great. And the important part is I just replaced the tip. And here is my soldering station. Now, speaking of tips, one of the other things I always have, it's usually used when I'm working on stuff, aside from the soldering braid, I have a little Tupperware tin that I usually keep handy because as I use, spare wire, etc., etc., I usually toss it in there. Or if I need, or if I have some heat shrink, I'll keep that in there. Because I'm doing this demonstration tonight, I kind of clean this up and put everything I plan to use in here. Here I have some little SMD chips because in the demonstration I'm going to show you how to wire those little jumping pads. We're going to put a jumper SMD on the bottom and we'll put an LED on top. And I also have a bunch of my alligator clips because I'm not putting this in a saber, we're just going to test it. So I brought my testing equipment down. These are all the wires. Here's my OLED, my little pre-wired Bluetooth module, complete with a little LED, and all the other wires I'm going to need to put onto the saber. Now, one of the other things which is very important to have, and I do have it and I do make great use of it, is magnifying. Now this is a nice little headlamp. It has drop down LED glasses. It has a little light so I can see what I'm doing. And knowledge is half the battle. Being able to see what you're doing is another 30% on top of that. So if you know what you're doing and you can see what you're doing, you're 80% of the way there. So those are the basic tools just to do simple installs. We were talking about soldering tips before, and I just brought a bunch of these down. These are in another tray, my wiring tray, which I didn't bring down here for this. I have several different tips. These are super long conical tips, very super long, super fine. The one I have in my gun, which I'll use tonight, isn't quite as fine, but still pretty good. And basically, these tips are slightly old, but I rarely use them. All these other tips I bought brand new. This one I just used for the first time today to do all the prep work for this. I have a couple other ones, One has like a little flat chisel point on it. One, which I kind of like to use every so often, tight spaces, has a curved tip. And this one is almost the same as this, only has a flat surface on one side of it. You have to always be able to see these up close, probably with this on, to really see the differences in the tips. But those are basically the general basic tools of the trade. Having a multimeter and all that stuff is also very useful. That's in my toolbox upstairs. For tonight's demonstration and tutorial, I don't really need any of that stuff. The one other thing I did bring down is my old test kit. A battery, switches, a working speaker, and a very old Crystal Focus. This is a Crystal Focus version 2.6. 2.61, I believe it was, and you could tell it's super old because it has the really old SD card holder on it. And this is what a Crystal Focus 2 circa 2007 looks like. I also have a 7.4 volt battery to power this, when I want to test other switches or LEDs, etc., etc. But for tonight, we'll be using this to test because Crystal Focus 10 ideally runs the best with a 3.7 volt battery, and this is what we're going to use for this evening. Now, the reason why I brought all those alligator clips down is because once I connect up the Crystal Focus, I'm just going to use the clamps to connect the speaker, this one switch, power it up, and you can hear some noise, and that shows that basically it's successfully booted up. I'm not going to connect it to anything else. Rob has done videos on how to build and connect NeoPixel blades, so between that and the handy little diagrams on this map, which you can get at the Custom Saber Shop, it explains everything you need, and even has diagrams on the back. This shows you how to wire it to a NeoPixel blade. On the front, down here is basically what we're going to be doing tonight. Wiring, we're going to wire up a Crystal Focus 10. I'm going to connect an OLED display and a Bluetooth module, the BT 909. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to readjust the camera, because if you can see it from this angle, you're not going to see much of the board work, and it'll probably be better if you see it looking down, kind of more from my perspective. So hang on, and we'll be back in a minute. This is something that Sam talked about last night as far as wanting to be more consistent as far as his base, his footwork, his mechanics. So we can deliver the ball to this very talented wide receiver group. That was a missed opportunity there. Okay. Alright, so we're back. As you see now, you can have a hopefully better view. I will try to zoom in some. Okay. Alright, so before we really get into the actual how-to of wiring, my advice to every beginner are some just minor basic things. Plan, prepare, and then execute. Now, what do I mean by that? Planning. When you prep the board, I always prepare my boards first. And what that means is I figure out what connections I'm going to need. I pre-solder the little connections. And the ones I'm going to use, those are the ones I solder. The ones I don't plan on using, I don't touch them. It saves me time. And it's also a good guide when you go to connect things. If you don't see, if you don't see any solder there, that's not the connection you're supposed to make. Next, and that goes into planning. If I'm not going to use, say, the Bluetooth module, I wouldn't solder these pads. If I wasn't going to use the OLED screen, I wouldn't connect these few pads. If I wasn't going to use any of the SMD or the accent pads, I wouldn't do anything with these pads up front. I will be doing one just as a sample, so I'm going to prep one pad. And I am going to be using most of these little accessory things because this board is basically for me to test stuff. I need speakers, I need power, I need the NeoPixel connectors, I need switches. So those are all going to get done. And I will do the top, and I may do some on the bottom because I need to put the jumper chip, the SMD jumper down here. I may tin a couple of these just to have them available if I need them. For this, I really don't, but I'll show you how to do it. And then once you've got done planning, and once you have your board prepared, all you really have to do is execute, which is basically soldering everything together. These steps I've cut out because you don't need to sit and watch me take 45 minutes to figure out which wires I'm going to use, etc., etc. I've already, as I've shown you, prepared the wires that I'm going to use. I have my little pre-wired Bluetooth module. I have a little pre-wired OLED screen. Oh, there it is. I have the Bluetooth module with a little LED already wired. And these wires are going to go to the various parts of the crystal focus to wire it up so it could be used. And I also have some heat shrink in here in my little boxes I showed you before, because I will be showing you guys how to do a Y connection, or as Irv calls it, vampire wiring. It'll help you out in the long run. So I'm going to go plug everything in, put my headset on, and then we will get to work. Okay, so before we get to actually wiring the board, we're going to go over a quick thing called Y joints, or like Irv says, vampire wiring. So here we have my OLED and my Bluetooth connections, Bluetooth and OLED modules. Each of them has a ground. Now, the Crystal Focus 10 does not have a lot of spots to connect ground wires. So what I do, and what I've done for years, is I have one wire that comes off the board. I see it down here. One wire that comes off the board and then feeds into grounds of other things. It could be switches. It could be these two accessory boards. It could be anything. So, vampire wiring, as you see, the blacks are my grounds, and you'll notice that I have a lot of different color wires. I have a special system that I've been using for years. It's worked fantastically for me. And in that system, basically black is considered ground. So I have the wires stripped, but they're not tinned. These are about the only 3 wires in this whole thing that I left untinned because I want to show you guys how to do this. You basically put the 2 wires together, use your flathead pliers, and basically twist. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to twist these wires together, and it's going to look like that. Then, what you're going to do is you're going to tin this all together, and then you're going to tin this end, which you're going to connect to it. Hopefully you can see that. You're going to tin these 2 together, and then you're going to tin this, and then you're going to connect them together. So, I will turn my little headlight on. And I will pre-tin both of these. Now, I see a lot of people making the mistake of leaving super long leads like that when they go to wire with crystal focus. I've seen boards that have been wired with there's like that much wiring hanging out. So if you know, that's ridiculous. No board should ever look like that. Okay, so why I use my snips is I cut these wires down to a reasonable length because I don't need the joint to be a mile long, I just need them to meet. So I am going to put them together like so. Remember I talked about locking pliers? Here's great use for them. Grab one end with your locking tweezers, and then I could just solder these 2 wires together. And the joint's secure. Now, anytime you do wiring like this, you should always put heat shrink on it. Basically, it covers the joint and make sure it doesn't get damaged. Now, the heat shrink I use is several different colors, several different diameters. They're all, again, like my wiring, those are color coded too. Okay. This red is just enough. No, actually, no, it's not, because I used a slightly thicker gauge here. I'll use a piece of the white. My white heat shrink will cover this all up. Now, heat shrink doesn't work unless you apply heat. So what I do is, like Rob has shown you in his videos, I take the shaft of my soldering iron and just rub it gently around both sides of the heat shrink, and you'll notice that the heat has shrunk in the heat shrink tubing, so now it's secure. Now what's going to happen is when we decide to finally wire all this to the board, this one little ground will go, this one ground wire will go into the one ground port that I have, that will be ready for it on the board, just like all these other wires will go into their respective connections. Okay, little ground, okay, the little ground port right there, that's where it's going to go into. Okay, so now that we have that little thing put aside, this is my vise that I usually use to do my board work. And I love it because it keeps the board very steady, which is critically important. If your work moves around on you, you will not get good results. That's kind of just a fact of life. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the crystal focus in it, and we're going to start preparing the board. Now I will be taking this board out and moving it around at times, because one of the tricks is I like to use this to lean my hand when I'm soldering stuff. And I will have to tilt this a little bit towards me. Hopefully. Alright, so you guys should still be able to see this. And now it's really a question of just going around and soldering the things I need. So I will start this end, and I will start here with the ground pad. Now, you don't always have to get it all perfect on the first try. Especially with the bigger pads, sometimes you may have to put a layer of solder down, let it sit, and then go over it again to get a nice little shiny bubble like that. So I just did the ground pad. Now I'm going to do the accessory pad. Then I skip one. Let me touch that up. Skip one, and then we'll do one for the LEDs, the OLED screen. Now, one thing when you use something like this, make sure you have the board sticking up enough so that you don't really damage your vise with the tip of your soldering iron. Missed slightly. Okay. Okay, so now we're back. Alright, then we're going to do these last four, because this is going to go to the Bluetooth module. Now don't forget, after every couple of uses, make sure you use your brass sponge to clean your tip. Clean tips, and that's what a clean tip looks like. Best friend for getting good soldering connections. Okay. And then I'm just going to continue working my way around the board. So next thing I'm going to need is I'm going to move this, because I need the power pads. Now the power pads are a little bit bigger, and they are close to some other chips. So that's another reason why I don't use the super fine point, because for this I need to bring a little heat. Now again, if you don't get it all at one try, just let what you have on cool off, and then you could always go back and touch it up if you need to. Okay? And again, don't forget to clean your tip. And then we continue on. Okay, switches.
He's going to send the punt team on the field. That's a nice, smart, safe strategy on the part of Texas. Run three, just rush three, drop the bait.
Normally I would do these on the underside, but just because I like doing it there doesn't mean I can't do it on the top side. And what I will do again is I'm going to readjust the board. and then I'm going to solder the what would be the LED or NeoPixel connections and the little data line.
Times in this first half, the Utes have gotten right to the 50-yard line, and I guess the nose of the ball. Good to see Jalen Green get up and walk off by himself. The nose of the football is just across midfield, but essentially Utah has not been able to...
Now, as you do this, or as you practice, like everything else in life, you'll get used to doing it your own way. Usually when I solder, I usually work inside or out, inside to out, and usually top to bottom. Just because I don't want to be crawling over the wires that I've already done. So I usually start with one and work my way down so that the connections I make aren't in the way, or the previous work I've done doesn't get in my way. Now, I said I wanted to do a SMD pad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the last one. And I'm only going to prep certain things. One of the things is I'm going to prep the little inside square. And I'm going to prep the outside ground connection. Now, the reason why I didn't do this other square, I will show you when we get to that stage. Now, on the underside of the board, what I usually do, and I will do it here. Okay, so I think my battery might have crapped out somewhere in the middle. So I switched to a regular power source. So like I said, I'm basically going to I'm going to prepare these two main power pads on the underside because I may need those to help run the positive to my NeoPixel, or I may ultimately down the line decide to run my main power lines from there and run my NeoPixel line from the top. Now what I can do and what I will do is I'm going to also prep my ground pads on the underside of the board. I don't know if you can see over here, it kind of shows you where the layout is underneath. There's a ground pad here and there's a ground pad there. So basically I'm going to prepare those two little pads as well, because you just never know. So 1, 2. Okay. Not normally, if I was going to use, say, a crystal chamber, depending on what I was going to use, I would prepare these little pads, these little PWM pads, but because I'm not using a pixel, I'm not using any kind of accent LED, RGB accent LED, I'm going to leave them alone. The only other pad I'm going to prep is, just like I did the top side, I'm going to prepare the bottom side for the little SMD chip for my SMD LED that I'm going to attach to this. So I set that, so I just prep the inside square and then the end ground point. I'm leaving the middle square open for now. And so, just like that, my card is now prepared. All the connections I need are done. And now all I have to do is just go through the minor task of wiring everything to the board. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the SMD first. That takes a little bit of, it takes a lot of practice, and it takes a little bit of work, and just connecting wires all the way around the board is not really hard at all, especially since I have everything prepped, so that's going to go by pretty quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my board in this way. I'm going to get out my anti-magnetic tweezers, I'm going to get out one of the little SMD chips that I pulled out of my stash. And then we're going to put it on the board. So we're going to take it out. Okay. Now, I don't know how well you can be able to see this. I will try to zoom in as much as humanly possible. Try to focus this. Okay, I think that's as close as I'm going to be able to get. Okay, the little chip is right here. Now, basically what we're going to do is I'm going to take this little chip, hold up my tweezers, I'm going to warm up the solder on this little square, and then I'm going to slide the chip into the solder. Remove my iron and let it cool off. So, and for this, basically, I have my maximum magnification glasses on. And just like that, the chip is connected on one side. Now, what I'm going to do is, because I left the other side blank, I can now fill in the solder there. And every time your favorite place is more about who than where. A Corona gets its line. Okay, I'm not sure how well you can see this. I will try to tilt this. Alright, now as you may have noticed, I did get a little extra solder on the pad next to it. So, that's where you take your handy dandy soldering braid, you just lay it over the top, and you just rub the soldering iron over it to wick up the excess solder.
A place you aspire to be. For some, there is a career helping those in need. For others, it's an office high above the city streets. There can be behind the scenes of a five-star hotel.
All right, the fact that I connected the ground to the pad doesn't matter because they were connected anyway. There's just a little bit of solder there. Like I said, I don't do SMD chips every day, but I have done them in the past. They're not my favorite thing to do, but it's there and it'll work. Now, time to wire up the board. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start soldering all the wires I have prepped to the board, and then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to reconnect the SMD LED that I have to the board, so we'll have like a little accent LED that works. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reposition this board again, and I'm going to orient it this way because where I want to work is over here. And I'm going to just level this a little bit more towards me, but you can still see what goes on. Okay, so I said I color code my wires. I tend to use gray for my NeoPixel wires. The color's kind of not really picked at random, but it's not a color I use often. But for NeoPixels, that's what I've decided to use. So again, I'm just going to put my glasses down and tighten them. And then it's just simply soldering. Now, one of the things before I get into actual soldering, if you notice, I've already pre-tinned and have this set. I don't have a lot of wire here. You don't need a lot of wire. I've seen a lot of people who basically, like I said, you know, have, you know, a long thing of wire like this stuck to the board. That's ridiculous. Don't do it. Take the time, prep your wiring, cut it to an appropriate length. You know, a 16th to a 32nd is fine. And it'll make your life easier in the end. So I'm just going to...
When it comes to resolutions, there's always next year. The new extra cheesy Alfredo pizza on garlic parmesan crust for just $10.
And if you think it's a little long, you could always trim it a little bit more. I use my snips all the time because I want good connections. This way my work works. I don't have to fix anything. I have probably one of the very fewest fix rates around because my stuff very rarely ever comes back with any problems because I take the time to do it right the first time. Okay.
There's no increased risk. Oh, but I only have to take it once a week.
Ozempic should not be the first medicine for treating diabetes or for people with type 1 diabetes or diabetic ketoacidosis. Do not share needles or pens. Don't use needles. Do not take
My snips are probably the one tool that gets used more than any other. Now, remember I said I work from the inside out, and this is one of the reasons why. I'm going to solder this one. Then I'm going to solder my data connection. And even if, you know, even though this looks like it's short, it's not short enough.
You may pay as little as $25 per prescription. Ask your healthcare provider today about once weekly.
And again, I'm working inside out. And the reason why is I'm not touching the work I previously did. I did the gray wire, now I'm doing the green wire, now I'll do this outside wire last, and I won't accidentally desolder any of my previous wires, and it'll all be nice and happy. Okay, so those are basically my NeoPixel wires and my data wire all attached. And we basically repeat the process for just about everything else on this board. Okay, time for my switch wires.
Really show no ability to hurl in the passing game, and they better have an answer for it, especially when you're backed up like this. Kansas has the 2 timeouts and a chance to get the ball back with great field position if they can stop Utah here.
Okay, so my activation wire goes in the spot closest to me, so that goes first. And if I think this connection is a little long, I will just trim like a 64th off of it. And that's connected. Same thing with my auxiliary switch. And now the little ground wire that's going to go to the switches. I will give that a quick trim. And that goes right here at the top.
35 out to the 38-yard line.
Let me readjust the board.
Texas defense down 3 men right now. We know about Brandon Jones. Chris Brown is now coming back with an ankle, and Jalen Green is probable to return with an ankle as well. Huntley trying to mark some instructions to a teammate. What a hit. That's Jake, which was a former walk-on.
So, now I've attached my switches, I've attached NeoPixels, I have some power cords here, and those are going to go next. Now, these are the things, I mean, I've gone over this 100 times, but I can't stress it enough. Don't use super long leads like this. I will adjust my wires, I will adjust the board. I will trim these down to a reasonable length. And because this pad's a little longer, I could use a slightly longer wire, but basically it should be like that. And again, I'm going to go inside out. So the inside is ground.
Championship game in a couple weeks. Reese, Des, and Pollock will be with you from the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Mercedes-Benz halftime report.
And the outside is positive, which is red.
If they want to have a chance to get anything out of this 2-minute drive, Huntley,
Okay. Now you may notice that my power lines are thicker than my other ones. When you do NeoPixel builds, and I'm pretty sure Rob covered this, you need thicker gauge wire to handle all the voltage and the extra current that's going to be flowing through the wires. These particular two wires are 22 gauge. The NeoPixel ground wires are 24 gauge. Most of the other wires I use are basically 28 gauge. I know a lot of people say, oh, you need to use 30, you need to use PFTE, etc., etc. You only really need to use 30 gauge wire if your unless you're working in really tight spaces or your cram through is not that great. If your cram through is pretty good, and after being around for 12 years, my cram through is still pretty good, you could get away with using slightly thicker gauge wire. Don't take chances. Use the right gauge wire, but do it right. The key to this hobby and the key to being successful in this hobby is just doing it right. Use the right gauge, use the right tools, don't rush, and you'll be fine. So now we're going to continue on. I'm going to reposition the board again, and then we're going to connect the speaker wires, and then we're going to connect the OLED and the Bluetooth modules. So it's basically everything on this side of the board.
the sophomore, with a nice finish to the regular season. He also stepped out of bounds to stop the clock with 59 seconds to go. Second down and 2 for Utah. Finally into Texas territory. Took him the whole half. So there's two things I like.
Okay, so I have two speaker wires here. They're brown. And again, I'm going to work from one side. Oh, let's readjust this. Okay, so here again, I have my speaker wires. And I'm going to work from one side down this way.
That's a big difference. Goes without saying. Instead of a 28-ish, back to the 40. Utah has all their timeouts and minutes to go. So they have plenty of time to minimum get in field goal range. They would like more. Huntley throws middle, counts a high, gets targeted, incomplete.
Okay. Now next, we will get my OLED and Bluetooth boards. So, according to the handy dandy chart down here, The first wire I'm going to connect is the power, which is my red wire. Okay. Next is I'm going to connect the receiving line from my Bluetooth to the transmission line here, which is going to be the next pad. Now on my Bluetooth, the receiving line is purple. It's the connection on top here. Alright, so that is going to go to the TX line here. Then the receiving line from the Bluetooth is going to go to the transmission line on the board. I'm sorry, the transmission line from the Bluetooth is going to go to the receiving line on the board. And remember our friend, the vampire wire, the wire connection, that goes in the ground. Okay. Then we have 3 more connections to make. So we have the SDA, which is white. So that's going to go in this first one.
That pressure is causing Tyler Huntley to make some bad decisions. It's something that Texas is really counting on in this football game as far as
Okay, and I'm having some kind of problem because it looks like one of the little threads got came apart. So I'm just going to quickly redo this connection. Alright, I'm going to check the solder here. I'm just going to resolder it. Clean the tip and try this again after I trim my line. Okay, and we continue on. The SCL line, which is purple, goes here. And be nice if I picked the right color wire. Okay, so apparently I'm having a lot of problems with the connections on this one, so we'll just quickly redo them. Better to redo it and get it right than to rush, try to force it, do a half-assed job, and have it come apart on you later on. It doesn't, it hurts your reputation, and you just don't get a good result.
Fans are going to roar their approval. Texas game ready to play. This has been a great game played over the Tom Herman and the Longhorns. Done everything they wanted to do. And as you can see, scoreboard good places. 10-0 Texas. Mercedes-Benz halftime report right after these messages.
I'm a tailgater tailgating to get to my tailgate. Now, it might not get faster, but hey, gets me ready for football. Let's tailgate. I can't
Okay. And then my last connection goes to the accessory, 3.3 accessory pad. Like so. Okay, so as you've seen, I just connected my OLED. I've connected my Bluetooth. I have wires to go to my speakers. I have wires to go to my power. I have wires to go to the NeoPixel and data line. And I have wires to go to my switch. I also have a ground wire to work with the switch. Now the only thing left is the little accent LED we discussed. Alright, so as you can see, we've now connected the OLED display. Alright, let's try this again. Okay, so as you can see, we've now connected the OLED display. I've connected my Bluetooth module, which are these wires down here. I've connected speaker wires. I've connected power wires. I've connected switch wires, which are basically these three. And I've connected all my NeoPixel and data wires, which are all these. The only thing left for me to do is the little SMD LED, which is right there. Now, yes, I told you that you should really you shouldn't try to work over your own work. I'm about to break that rule. But, you know, really, if you're starting out, don't break that rule. So, here we have little green SMD LEDs. And I'm going to take one out. And I'm going to find my little pliers. I'm going to turn this around to make my life easier so I could actually work on this.
Championship drive, 10 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow morning. Set up the full day. College football New Year's Day 2020 as we ring out an old decade and ring in a new one. Reese Davis, David Pollack,
okay, let's see. Okay, you guys can see this. Right, the chip is right. The chip is right down there. And I know this is hard to see. Sorry about that, but you know, I just want to make sure that I get the right end. You want the positive side of the LED to go towards the MCU and the negative side to go towards the ground pad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in place. Okay. And then, just like we did before, I'm going to heat up the solder. Slide it in. Okay, once that side dries, I will go ahead and solder the other end because both have to connect for this to work. Now, if you're really squeamish about this in the beginning, you can turn your soldering iron off. You can switch tips. Once your soldering iron cools down, don't burn yourself. You can switch to long conical tip to make your life easier. And just like that, we're basically done. So now I'm going to back this up so we have a little more.
You haven't seen the sun in like forever, so you search for a beach vacation.
You can see, and maybe I'll just move that back. So now basically we have, even though it's a mess of wires, we basically have a Crystal Focus 10 wired up with a Bluetooth module, a little LED screen. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to strip a few of these wires, connect, I'm just going to connect power, I'm going to connect speakers, and I'm going to connect the switch. And then I will put the SD card in it, we'll fire it up, and you'll see that it works. And now we're just going to start connecting stuff. First we're going to connect the speakers. Now I didn't tin or solder any of these are just temporary connections. I'm going to take this apart after this video is over, but for now I'm just going to use my cute little banana clips to make sure all this stuff works. Okay, whoops. Much easier soldering stuff, but like I said, this is just really temporary. Okay, next are my switches, which are yellow and the ground. So I will use my auxiliary switch, which is the only one I really prepped. Now, before I connect the power, I'm just going to get the SD card out. One thing I probably didn't mention in the beginning, don't solder the card with the SD chip in it. You'll do damage to the, you could do a lot of damage to the SD chip and wipe it out or make it unusable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this bad boy in, like so. And then I'm going to find my main power wires, which are these two here. I have this is a NeoPixel battery though, I don't have a NeoPixel connected, I didn't connect the NeoPixel to anything. I'm just really using this for power purposes, so I will connect the positives.
What starts here creates leaders and sparks our future. What starts here
And when I connect the negatives, we should have power.
leads to answers to the world's toughest problems. What starts here builds opportunity and lifts up.
And if I did all this right, when I make this connection, actually this looks a little thin.
University of Texas at Austin.
Oh, that side's thin, okay.
This halftime report is presented by Mercedes-Benz, the best or nothing.
So when I connect these two, I should have power. So I will now officially hit the activation button because I had two of them touching. And as you can see, I saw the green LED flashing on the board, so that works too. And basically, even though this looks like spaghetti, because I didn't size any of these wires to anything, we have a working Crystal Focus 10. So basically, that's what it takes to wire crystal focus. It's not the hardest thing in the world, like I said. If you plan, you prepare, and you execute, you could easily do this. Sizing wires or figuring that out, that goes into the design of your saber. Usually all these various parts, the crystal focus, the Bluetooth module, the OLED screen. So that's basically how you wire a Crystal Focus 10. There will be chassis discs that go along that work with Crystal Focus 10 and the 18650 battery. Tim and I have designed them. I did use a prototype in a build I did recently for a client. I have the second round of prototypes upstairs. I will be using that in one of my personal sabers to test it out. We also developed a chassis discs for the Bluetooth modules. It will have the Bluetooth module on top and the 18650 battery underneath. I will eventually, once we figure out a little bit more, try to design some kind of chassis, acrylic chassis discs for these OLED screens, so you can mount them inside a saber, have them with Tim cut out a window, and you can have a nice display like you see on the Vader's Vault Sovereign. I know Tim's also working on control box mounts for these OLED screens. So that all will be coming. Tim and his people have been very busy pulling waters. It's been a very good Christmas. A lot of people bought a lot of custom saber shop stuff. Tim and the whole gang thanks you. Supporting businesses like his help advance the hobby. We just want to wish everybody a Happy New Year. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments or on the forums. The Custom Saber Shop also has forums attached to them where you can find tons of knowledge. The link to this video will be there as well. And happy sabering. Take care.